On Christmas Day, my daughter-in-law called me overly sensitive, brushing me off like I was just some nagging old woman. I didn't say a single word. I simply opened my online banking, looked at the automatic payments that had been funding their lifestyle for years, and deleted them. 3 clicks. Just like that, my house belonged to me again. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed exactly 7 times. I sat at the kitchen table of my home in Madison, holding a warm mug of coffee and watching the heavy snow blanket the yard. My daughter-in-law, Heather, stood at the stove with her back to me. She was stirring the gravy as if she had owned this kitchen for years. My son, Tyler, sat right next to her, his eyes glued to his smartphone, a sight that had become entirely too common lately. "Martha, you're just being too sensitive," Heather said without bothering to turn around. Her voice was sharp. "Don't expect us to jump through hoops every single holiday just to please you. Grow up and stop turning everything into an emotional crisis." She slammed the pan onto the stovetop with a loud clang. Tyler winced slightly, but didn't say a word. He didn't even look up. I felt a sudden chill in my chest, but my hand remained completely steady. I am 67 years old, a widow of 5 years, and I built this house alongside my late husband. Heather had just called me pathetic in my own home, all because I had suggested we go for a family walk in the snow. She preferred to drive downtown to do some shopping. "And don't start crying to us about old memories or money," Heather added with practiced contempt. "Adults handle their own finances." She knew damn well that for the past 2 years, I had been transferring $1,000 every month into their joint account, supposedly to fund my grandson Liam's college savings. In reality, that money was fueling Heather's expensive taste, while Tyler's salary barely covered the rent on their downtown apartment. I took a slow sip of my coffee. No tears, no raised voice. Right next to the sugar bowl, my laptop sat open, the online banking portal glowing on the screen. I stared at the recurring monthly transfers. Heather thought my generosity was a given, an eternal entitlement. She was dead wrong. I quietly closed the laptop lid and stood up to clear the table. The game had just fundamentally changed. The day after Christmas passed in an icy silence. Heather and Tyler packed up and left early in the afternoon without a real goodbye. As the front door clicked shut, I took a deep breath. The house smelled like cinnamon, but it also carried the scent of a shattered illusion. I walked into my small home office, sat at my desk, and pulled out the binder containing my bank statements from the last few years. Heather had been right about one thing: adults handle their own finances. I opened the banking app again. My finger hovered over the red button for the monthly transfer labeled Liam's Support. $3,000 a quarter. On top of that, there were the payments for Heather's leased SUV, which were still mistakenly being drafted from my secondary account because I had tried to do a nice thing when she first bought it. I didn't feel anger, just a deep, logical clarity. With 3 precise clicks, I deleted the recurring transfer to their joint account. Then I pulled up the auto lease authorization and revoked the direct deposit agreement effective at the end of the month. It wasn't revenge. It was the restoration of boundaries. They wanted independence, so they were going to get it, consequences and all. Just as I locked my laptop, my phone buzzed on the dresser. A text from Tyler. "Heather is still pissed about your attitude. Let's take some space in January." I stared at the screen. My son had become completely blind to reality. I didn't type out a long justification. I wasn't about to waste my energy. I replied with a single word: agreed. Then I put the phone down, grabbed some birdseed, and went out into the yard. The snow crunched beneath my winter boots and the air was wonderfully crisp. The stillness of the garden was exactly what I needed because I knew that in a few days, this peace and quiet would be shattered on the other side of town. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer or the police. Instead, I called my neighbor Gary, who ran a small handyman business. He swung by before lunch, armed with his toolbox. Heather had a spare key to my house, and over the last few months she had taken to using it unannounced, sneaking into my space and rearranging my things without asking. "Just for peace of mind, Martha?" Gary asked, handing me the new deadbolt cylinder for the front door. I gave him a brief nod. "Yes, Gary. Times change." 20 minutes later, the job was done. The new key turned in the lock with a heavy, satisfying metallic click. It felt wonderful. My home was actually my sanctuary again. I walked through the rooms and began undoing Heather's little adjustments. She had rearranged the decor in the living room and banished my late mother's old porcelain teapots to the basement because she thought they looked too old-fashioned. I brought the porcelain back upstairs and set it in its rightful place in the solid oak cabinet. Every object returned to where it belonged. That afternoon, I brewed a fresh cup of chamomile tea. The list of the household utility bills sat on the kitchen table. I had spent so much time financially keeping them afloat that I had been neglecting myself. That was over. My phone remained silent all day, and I savored every minute of the artificial calm. Around 8 o'clock that evening, I saw the first sign of the incoming storm. A notification from my bank flashed on my phone screen. Automatic transfer successfully canceled. Heather usually monitored their finances down to the penny toward the end of the month. It didn't take long for the first strike to land. A text message from Heather flashed. "Martha, was there an issue with the bank? The money for Liam's account didn't go through." I read it twice, flipped the phone face down on the counter, and finished my tea in absolute peace. I didn't reply to Heather until after breakfast the next day. My message was matter-of-fact and left no room for misinterpretation. "No issue with the bank. I have stopped the payments. You mentioned on Christmas that adults handle their own finances. I agree." It took exactly 4 minutes for my phone to start ringing off the hook. I ignored it. The phone vibrated violently against the wooden table, sliding a few inches to the left before finally going silent. Then it started all over again. Tyler tried 3 times. Heather tried 4. I didn't pick up. Anyone who thinks they can insult me 1 minute shouldn't expect me to throw them a lifeline the next. I put on my coat and walked down to the local farmer's market. When I got back, Tyler's car was parked in my driveway. He was sitting at the wheel, staring at my front door. The moment he spotted me, he jumped out. His face was pale, and his shoulders sagged. "Mom, what is this?" he shouted as I set down my grocery bags. "Heather is giving me absolute hell. The lease payment on the SUV bounced too." "I didn't bounce anything, Tyler," I said calmly, pulling my new key from my pocket. "I simply revoked the authorization to draft from my account. Heather can easily keep paying for the car with her own money." Tyler stepped up to the door and tried to use his old key, but it wouldn't budge. He looked at me utterly dumbfounded. "Did you change the locks?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Yes," I replied, opening the door and stepping inside. "It's my house. I like to know who's coming in." He tried to follow me, but I blocked the doorway. He was my son, but he needed to learn that respect is a two-way street. "Mom, we need to talk," he pleaded, almost begging. "I'd love to," I answered, "but not today and not standing in the doorway. I'll reach out to you." I shut the door in his face. The sound of Tyler's car driving away faded into the quiet neighborhood street. I sat down in my armchair and felt my heart thumping, but it wasn't out of fear. It was the rush of reclaiming control. For years, I had felt like a guest in my own life, always walking on eggshells just to keep the peace in the family. Later that afternoon, Heather called me from an unknown number, thinking it was the furnace repairman I picked up. "Martha, you are unbelievable," she practically screamed into the receiver. "Because of you, they're going to repossess the car. And what about Liam's tutoring? You are ruining your grandson's future out of pure malice." Her voice was hysterical with rage. I remained completely unshaken, holding the phone a few inches away from my ear. "Liam doesn't have a tutor, Heather," I said evenly. "I spoke with his teacher last week. He has straight A's and B's in all his classes. That money never went toward his education. So please spare me the fairy tales." Complete and utter silence fell over the line. She hadn't expected me to actually check up on things. I wasn't the naive old woman they took me for. "If you are having financial trouble, you need to adjust your budget," I added. "I am no longer your bank." Before she could fire back, I hung up the phone. I went down to the basement and dug out the old boxes containing my painting supplies. The guest bedroom upstairs, the one Heather always claimed for her occasional visits and insisted on decorating to her taste, was going to become my art studio starting tomorrow. I didn't need to reserve a room for people who only visited when their bank account was empty. That very evening, I began packing her expensive cosmetics and the clothes she'd left behind into a large cardboard box. Everything was neatly taped up, ready to be handed over. 2 days later, I texted Tyler and suggested we meet up. Not at my house, but at a neutral diner downtown. I purposely showed up 5 minutes late. He was sitting at a corner booth staring into a cold cup of coffee. Heather wasn't there. I had made that a strict condition. He looked exhausted, almost like he'd aged a few years overnight. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said quietly. I sat across from him, set my purse on the empty seat, and ordered a hot tea. "Tyler, let's keep this short." I began without beating around the bush. "I love you. You are my son. But I will not allow your wife to humiliate me in my own home ever again." "She didn't mean it like that." He tried to placate me, but I raised my hand slightly. He shut his mouth instantly. "She meant exactly what she said. And you sat right there and let her. You two took my money while treating me like a miserable chore. That ends now. The well has officially run dry." Tyler swallowed hard. "Mom, we don't know how we're going to pay rent next month if we have to cover the full car payment too." Heather completely miscalculated the finances. He looked down at the table. It broke my heart to see my son like this, but pity wasn't going to fix his lack of a backbone. "Then you need to break your lease and find a smaller apartment," I said matter-of-factly. "Or Heather needs to work more hours. She only works part-time, Tyler. You are both young enough to fund your own lives." The waitress brought my tea. I slowly stirred in a spoonful of sugar while Tyler let the harsh reality sink in. There were no more excuses. No legal loopholes, no drawn-out drama, just the raw numbers and the logical consequences of how they chose to treat me. When I left the diner, a wave of relief washed over me. I was walking out to the parking meter when my phone vibrated again. This time, it was a number I recognized instantly, Sharon, Heather's mother. We rarely spoke since she lived in a different state, and Heather kept her at arm's length too. I answered the call. "Martha!" Sharon's voice came through. "I'm calling because Heather just rang me up completely hysterical. She claims you've completely abandoned them." I took a brief breath and kept my composure. "Sharon, I simply stopped funding her lifestyle after she insulted me in my own home on Christmas." A deep sigh echoed from the other end of the line. To my absolute surprise, there was no lecture. "I figured as much," Sharon said softly. Heather has been trying to squeeze every single penny out of everyone around her for years. She tried it with me too, until I finally went low contact. Don't let her guilt trip you, Martha. That conversation felt incredibly validating. It proved that I wasn't the crazy, bitter woman Heather was trying to paint me as. I was just the latest person to finally draw a line in the sand. Thank you, Sharon, I said genuinely. That means a lot to me. We said our goodbyes, and I felt the last lingering weight lift from my shoulders. When I got home, I painted the first wall of the former guest room a warm, sunny yellow. The space was transforming, just like my life. I didn't need anyone's permission to be happy anymore. The colors on the canvas were my fresh start. Still, I knew Heather wouldn't give up that easily. Her pride was wounded, and a wounded pride always searches for a way out, even when the situation is hopeless. It was a Saturday morning when 3 sharp knocks rattled the front door. I looked through the window and saw Tyler standing there. He didn't have the large cardboard box of Heather's things that I had left on the porch for him days ago. Instead, he was holding a small, white envelope. I cracked the door open. "Mom, Heather wrote this for you," he said, handing me the letter. His voice sounded hollow. I took the envelope but didn't open it right away. "Is this an apology, Tyler?" I asked, bluntly. He looked away. "It's a proposal for how we can settle things." I shut the door, sat down at the kitchen table, and tore open the envelope. It wasn't a letter filled with remorse. It was a cold, calculated list of terms. Heather proposed that I continue to pay for half of the SUV lease, and in exchange, she would allow Liam to spend every other weekend with me. She was actually trying to use my grandson as a bargaining chip. A cold smile crossed my face. She just didn't get it. She still thought everything had a price tag. I grabbed a red pen, drew a massive X across the entire page, and wrote a single word at the bottom, "No." Then I slid the paper back into the envelope. I walked back to the door where Tyler was still waiting in the freezing wind. I handed the envelope back to him. "Give this to your wife, and tell her that if Liam wants to see me, he can call me whenever he wants. He has his own cell phone. We don't need contracts or conditions for that." Tyler looked down at the bold red lettering on the envelope. He finally understood that the era of manipulation was permanently over. He gave a silent nod and walked away. The weeks rolled by and the Midwest landscape slowly began to brace for the coming spring. The snow melted away and the first crocuses started poking their heads through the soil. A wonderful, productive tranquility filled my home. My new art studio was finished and my first 3 paintings were already hanging on the wall. I didn't hear a peep from Heather or Tyler for weeks. Later on, I found out from my neighbor Gary, who ran into Tyler at the hardware store, that they had broken the lease on their downtown apartment. They were moving into a much cheaper 2-bedroom place out in the suburbs. The leased SUV was gone. Heather was taking the bus to work now. Reality had finally caught up with them. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was Liam, my grandson. "Grandma?" he asked a little shyly. "Can I come over this weekend? I really want to see what you're painting." My heart swelled. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "Just come on over. I'll have some dessert ready." Not a single word about his mother, and not a single word about money. As I hung up, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had cut away the rot so it could heal. I had stopped using my hard-earned savings to cover up other people's toxic behavior. They had to face their own choices now, grow up, and take responsibility for their own lives. I walked into the kitchen and started prepping the dough for a homemade apple pie. The house smelled like home again, not conflict. My finances were in order and my boundaries were set in stone. I was no longer a victim of their entitlement. I was the master of my own domain. The phone stayed completely silent, and it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Liam sat at my kitchen table, eating a massive slice of apple pie. He chatted away about school, his friends, and his plans for the summer. He didn't bring up the move or the stress at home even once. To him, I was just Grandma, the one place where the world still made perfect sense. Later that afternoon, Tyler came by to pick him up. He stood in the entryway and looked around the house. He noticed the changes, the fresh yellow paint on the walls, and my mother's porcelain teapots back in the cabinet. He looked calmer, almost a bit relieved, as if the crushing pressure of the last few weeks had finally lifted from his shoulders, too. "The room looks beautiful, Mom," he said softly, gesturing toward the art studio. "Thank you, Tyler," I replied, handing him a travel mug of coffee. He accepted it gratefully. We didn't talk about Heather, and we didn't drag up the past. There was no grand, tearful reconciliation scene, no emotional fireworks, but there was a new foundation, absolute respect for my space. Long after they drove away, I stood by the window looking out into the yard. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the evening sky in deep shades of orange. I knew the future wouldn't be flawless. Heather would likely never love me, and my relationship with my son would take time to truly mend. But that was perfectly fine. I had learned that peace doesn't mean the total absence of conflict. Peace means holding on to your own keys, controlling your own worth, and never sacrificing your dignity just to keep someone else comfortable. I closed the window, lit a candle, and settled into my armchair with a good book. I was finally free.